So let's touch on this real quick. So for everybody paying attention at home, landflex.org is now your home base for everything we're talking about. It has a PowerPoint that walks you through a lot of what we're talking about here. It has your portal as that gets to go live. It has the links to the different resource documents and resource pages. Right now, if you are in one of these selected basins, I would suggest you go to landflex.org and you start looking at these maps and assessing which parts of your property or which parts of your ranch are going to have the best shot, or that you're considering, right? So maybe you already have plans. You need to look at, whether or not you qualify for this program is going to be based on your proximity to those dry and domestic wells. Get on landflex.org, get on some of these map tools so you can start assessing and developing your plan here. With that, Anja touched on a really key point: technical assistance providers. The state selected 4 entities to act as basically your guides through this process, to help you through it, not only to understand the program, but also how to apply, and whose job it is to do kind of the spot checking and to work with GSAs to make sure that this functions. Think of us as the facilitator on the line. So our job at Western United Dairies, Almond Alliance, CAF, and Self-Help is to do just that. So if, again, landflex.org has the contact information for everybody. We're here to help. And it's not discriminatory. A dairy person can call Almond Alliance, an almond person can call Western United Dairies. We're all trained the same way. We know the program inside and out. This is what we're here to do. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Almond Alert. I'm Aubrey Bettencourt, President and CEO of the Almond Alliance. This week is actually an interesting follow-up to a concept that we've been talking about all this time. LandFlex, the Department of Water Resources' new groundwater and drought response program, has been announced and formally has granted awards to 3 scored GSAs. Now, if you'll recall, the LandFlex program was designed as a farmer program to support domestic wells and at-risk wells in rural communities, while simultaneously facilitating SGMA compliance. So really becoming that bridge and that flexibility tool that so many of our farmers have been needing as they face these growing challenges of groundwater regulation, as well as supporting domestic wells, especially in drought. But in times of plenty as well is equally as important, because it does provide that flexibility to the landowner to be able to be part of the solution for groundwater health and wellness, as well as water supply and quality. And with the new announcement from DWR, we decided to jump on with our fellow technical assistance provider, Western United Dairies, to discuss some of the details of who the awards were, what the application process will look like, and to remember kind of the policy story and history of how we got to where we are and where we're going. It's a really incredible program that provides a new tool to our farmers and allows us to maintain financial and environmental health going forward. Again, visit landflex.org, and without further ado, here is LandFlex. I can't believe it. We're here. It's a thing. We've been talking about it, and now it's here, and it's real. And it is real. And I think that's what folks are struggling with at this point, is what does it mean? And it's a real deal, and it's an actual tool in the toolkit. At the same time, I'm really encouraged by the GSAs that applied, the GSAs that were selected, and it's a tool. It's a tool that I think everybody gets, and it's really been interesting to see the embrace of it. So, I mean, DWR has announced finally the comment period closed. They did some refining on the program, and they've released the final. What do they call it? The final rule, the final announcements of awards. Yep.
Or we should say the initial announcement of awards.
There we go. So let's talk about that a little bit, Anja. It's the initial announcement of awards. We've got 3 GSAs in this first tranche. I know that's a word we all love. $25 million, right? Going to...
Yeah, so I think just to summarize LandFlex briefly, for those of you that are just joining us under a rock, the program is another opportunity for farmers to make their way through SGMA compliance. We have a number of programs out there that are either private sponsored, state sponsored, and this is a new state sponsored program called LandFlex, which encourages early adoption of SGMA implementation measures. So this is a program where farmers will receive incentives for three following actions. One is for providing immediate drought relief, which we call fallowing. The other is the long-term elimination of groundwater overdraft, which is the retirement of the annual acre foot that is overdraft classified by their GSA. And then the final piece of this incentive program is called transition, and the transition to a more sustainable yield practice on the ground that's enrolled. So the removal of trees or vineyards or upcycling of orchards and or replacing winter wheat and corn with almond holes. These are practices that are going to be incentivized so that on that enrolled acre of LandFlex, you stop overdrafting for the very long term. Now, lots of hovering questions about that, but we'll get into it. I think that it's important. The biggest news that we have today is that 3 GSAs have initially been selected. The first one by a long shot was the Madera GSA, which includes 3 subbasins. The second one was Greater Cahuilla, which is a very, very large basin. And then lastly, the Eastern Tule. 27 GSAs applied for this program. DWR did score quite a few more than I'm mentioning. And so we're all going to do our best to make sure that LandFlex basically presents on its promise of sustainability and a fast forward button to Sigma.
So, okay, before anybody freaks out over what that means, let's just lay the baseline out of, we all know Sigma's here. Like it's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act isn't going anywhere. And the implementation of it, has needed tools in the toolkit, especially for farmers who are ultimately the primary player to achieving this. And I think what we did here with LandFlex is it spins it on its head and says the farmer and the resource, the land, is part of the solution and not necessarily part of the problem. And so as we kind of look forward here and some of the, I think the key questions that come out of this, and I appreciate you going over the 3 components here of what LandFlex is. One is I think to remember, and most everybody who looks at this thing says, great, finally a tool that helps take me from where I am today to where I'm going to have to be. And simultaneously, because it scores based on proximity to domestic wells, it actually is hitting on the true intent of aquifer health and sustainability, which is to protect our groundwater and to create our groundwater, a healthy groundwater level. And so proximity, especially to rural and domestic water systems, is how the individual folks are going to be scored. So let's start with, now that we've kind of gone through that, some of the key questions that come up. One that we hear a lot, which is, okay, my GSA was selected, now what? Where are we on application?
So any day now, the farmer portal will open. Aubrey and I have been preparing for this for the better part of 2 years. So we are waiting for the final review process at DWR to open that farmer portal. And so there's a couple, I'd say, nuts and bolts that need to be tightened here. But generally speaking, we have designed an online site that every farmer that's in these GSAs will be able to go to under landflex.org. And that portal will essentially house your application, your requirement forms, what you'd like to enroll, all of the backup documentation, including how you find your proximity to dry and domestic wells, your proximity to susceptible dry wells. There is a worksheet that's being developed as we speak that really gives everyone an equal opportunity to find their proximity to wells. And so a lot of people are, how do I get selected? Well, it's not luck. It's more about your proximity to the most wells. And so in order to prioritize those vulnerable communities and those underserved communities, DWR is looking for properties that are near and adjacent to large community supply wells, public supply wells, schools, disadvantaged communities, or there's several transient communities or what they call non-community-based communities that you can find in the Sigma viewer. But there are 2 websites that if you actually go to landflex.org now, you can see on our PowerPoint that we listed for the World Ag Expo. So if you're thinking about playing around with that, but this is exactly what Aubrey and I have been tasked with doing with DWR for this project. We're supposed to be helping farmers find this information, and we are very, very happy to be able to do that now. Yep. So A farmer in these selected GSAs, so just for repetition, Madera, Greater Cahuilla, and Eastern Tule, will be able to go into LandFlex.org in a matter of days and file their application. Just a few things to note, because we do get a lot of comments in the field about this. We know that time is of the essence. We know that summer planting decisions may have already happened. And so we're really hoping to capture what we can as it pertains to balancing the very dry season that will come in the summer. But we recognize that. And I know that we wish that this had been done last October, but it is what it is. So we're rolling. I would say, as far as government works, this has been lightning speed.
I would agree with that. So let's touch on this real quick. So for everybody paying attention at home, LandFlex.org is now your home base for everything we're talking about. It has a PowerPoint that walks you through a lot of what we're talking about here. It has your portal as that gets to go live. It has the links to the different resource documents and resource pages. Right now, if you are in one of these selected basins, I would suggest you go to landflex.org and you start looking at these maps and assessing which parts of your property or which parts of your ranch are going to have the best shot, or that you're considering, right? So maybe you already have plans. You need to look at, whether or not you qualify for this program is going to be based on your proximity to those dry and domestic wells. Get on landflex.org, get on some of these map tools so you can start assessing and developing your plan here. With that, Anja touched on a really key point: technical assistance providers. The state selected 4 entities to act as basically your guides through this process, to help you through it, not only to understand the program, but also how to apply, and whose job it is to do kind of the spot checking and to work with GSAs to make sure that this functions. Think of us as the facilitator on the line or the expediter on the line. I came from a catering and restaurant background, so that's kind of how we look at it. So our job at Western United Dairies, Almond Alliance, CAF, and Self-Help is to do just that. So if, again, landflex.org has the contact information for everybody. We're here to help. And it's not discriminatory. A dairy person can call Almond Alliance, an almond person can call Western United Dairies. We're all trained the same way. We know the program inside and out. This is what we're here to do. So kind of pivoting back here at that point, or at this point now, we're waiting for some last minute data to come in, to drop in so you can actually fill out your application. We're training up with the GSAs that have been selected. You said, Anja, 27 GSAs applied. What happens to, and more scored, which was great. I mean, this is, again, speaking to the fact that this is a tool that desperately is needed to make this work. Speaking again to this, what happens if you're in a GSA that wasn't selected, and what's the state's plan on this?
So the state has hopes for more money being released very soon. Like I said, is 27 applied, and I think that it's really important to point out that 27 critically overdrafted basins are interested in this tool, and they understood what they were reading. They understood what was being asked of the farmer, in this case, what he was giving up, he or she. And so, but 7 scored, and that means those that have existing critically overdrafted basins, plus an allocation and implementation system for monitoring tiered overdraft and the reduction thereof. That was the important criteria and deal breaker for, basically you had dry wells overlapped with critically overdrafted basins, plus you had adopted and implemented a methodology for glide path elimination of overdraft. Mm-hmm. And so obviously not all 27 are in that phase yet, mm-hmm. but DWR is hoping that this type of incentive program is really the carrot versus the stick that moves people into more compliance much more rapidly with Sigma, because there's not been a tremendous amount of tools for the individual farmer to try to accelerate his Sigma compliance. There are a number of other wonderful programs. Some of these GSAs that did apply actually do have their own fallowing programs. Mm-hmm. And those are all meant to be tools in a basket for a farmer and or a GSA to choose from. The multi-benefit habitat repurposing program is another one. I will tell you, GWR is looking like they're looking for these as a laser scope and how to overlap one with the other and basically make the most sense for strategic recharge in the future. Right. But that being said, if you are in a GSA that has not been either scored or announced yet, I really think that you need to get into contact with Aubrey and I. We will make sure that your local elected official is engaged. We will make sure that your local counties, your mayors, your boards of supervisors. I think that this is something we were hoping to design to really move some of these lands that are essentially tied up in bank ownership into a way that doesn't completely negate their value overnight. Yeah. And obviously, as trade associations that depend on voluntary dues and a healthy ag economy, we did not want anybody to become fallowing farmers. Mm-hmm. So just to remind people of some of the guardrails in this program, and then we'll go back to the payments. Yeah. We do have two basic guardrails. One is a $2.5 million average over 3 years AGI cap. So if you exceed that, you're not eligible for LandFlex.
That's per entity.
Per entity, correct.
Yep.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And then the other one per entity as well is you cannot. There is a payment limitation of $2.5 million, mm-hmm. and so again per entity. So those guardrails kind of keep people hopefully in the right spectrum of small and mid-sized farmers. That's what DWR really wants to tailor this to. But more broadly, a farmer may enroll 40 acres or up to 25% of his entity or his total ownership. And so again, keeping in mind that we're not trying to create just a whole new bureaucracy for fallowing, we want to make sure that we're still stewards of the lands and that the banks still find value in lending to us. Yeah. So those things are really important, I think, in mentioning that the three payments, the reason I start with that is to distinguish LandFlex from all other fallowing programs. It is not a fallowing program, and it is a sustainable yield program, which is why it's rather expensive. And there is a lot being given up here. Mm-hmm. So in addition to transitioning the land away from a fairly high evapotranspirative consumptive use, you're also committing to DWR that you're going to keep farming that acre in sustainable yield thereby moving forward.
I'm gonna put a pin on this real quick because you use a key word there, which is keep farming.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it sounds so silly, and I don't mean to get meta here, but to your point, you're laying out so clearly not only the fiscal, but I'm going to bring in the resource management side of this, which is the critically important approach here that we're taking and that the state is taking with LandFlex with us, which is the idea that the land maintaining its flexibility in farming is the solution. Okay, And what is so critical about why LandFlex is different, and I'm going to let you continue because it's going to dovetail perfectly, watch this, is LandFlex is about the water, not about the land. There is this, as we address issues of water supply management in a conjunctive way, and that's a lot of big words, but that means surface and ground together, that there's this misconception that fallowed land equals water, and that's not necessarily true. And people who work on the resource, and every average farmer knows, I don't care where you are, if you're in the West, you know that fallowed land does not necessarily equal water. And so what is so critical here about LandFlex is it really is about the water and really is about utilizing the farmer's existing infrastructure, in this case, the land, to facilitate not only continuing an ag economy and a viable economic base, but also achieving or contributing towards the solutions around this conjunctive use management of aquifer health and community health and safety as well. So I'm going to let you go back into your conversation there.
No, and establishing a value for the water, which has never been done before under the ground by the state of California, was uniquely important in developing this program. And so I think that, again, the GSAs that applied understood this. The farmers that are looking at this, if they don't understand it, that's what Aubrey and I are here to answer. We really want to make sure that people understand this is a voluntary program. Okay, so if you look at everything and you decide that this is not right for your operation, Godspeed. There are other choices. There are other ways to do this. We are just trying to operate under the assumption that farmers are fallowing anyway, and we want to move that decision along. And we want to make sure that the Sigma compliance tool, as Aaron Fukuda would say, is a strike force Sigma weapon. Mm-hmm. And so, again, maybe it won't be for everyone. I understand there are, seriously, out in particularly Greater Korea, there are major challenges out there with looking at what their next year's allocation of overdraft is going to be, We understand that farmers maintain bank accounts on this land. DWR cannot buy what is not for sale. I think that's a really basic way of saying that. If you haven't heard me say that, please listen to our last week podcast from the World Ag Expo. But it's also really important to understand from the farmer's perspective that when you enroll in LandFlex and take this money, you are expected to farm within the sustainable yield, which is up to your GSA. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that local control aspect, and so those two sentences are really important. I want to make sure they're always linked. You are expected to farm within sustainable yield, which is up to your GSA. The GSA will be the police and the policy enforcement arm of what they think the basin can tolerate, what sustainable yield is today. Hopefully will change with some recharge and really good strategic storm placement. DWR does not want to get in the way of that. That is a critical function to SGMA's success. But we wanted to make sure that we gave the GSAs the flexibility they each individually need to balance those bank accounts, because at the end of the day, it is their obligation to DWR to show that demand reduction has actually happened as a result of LandFlex.
Yep.
And so rather than forcing a prescriptive definition or a prescriptive accounting methodology, I believe that DWR arrived at the best conclusion here, which is local control and local accounting for this rapid reduction of aquifer demand.
So I love that. Let's hit it again. DWR is not buying what you are not selling, right?
Correct.
And you are expected to retire an overdraft amount as prescribed and defined by the GSA.
Yes.
In order to begin farming within sustainable yield. Now, those are three big, heavy components, but I think anybody listening knows if you're in one of these GSAs or you're in a critically overdrafted basin or you are farming in California, you understand what this all means. Let's really hit on that second piece here of retirement of overdraft. Everybody has a different definition within their GSAs. However, this goes to that bank account per acre. If you're in a critically overdrafted basin that has an established sustainable yield, that is the level by which farming at or under is considered healthy for the basin, right?
Correct.
Your glide path is what was allocated to you by your GSA, which is being tapered off, which is your overdraft over sustainable yield, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Some portion of that in your voluntary enrollment in LandFlex of what you are willing to sell is part of your application, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that means it's reduced and retired, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So just so everybody knows, that's what that means. Just want to make sure we get that one clear, because I think this is a piece that I think people get in the weeds a little hung up on it that it doesn't need to be. I think we're all pretty well understood what sustainable yield is, what the overdraft component is, and what it means to retire that when sold. So I think at this point, that's that part two of the.
Well, and people get hung up on it, rightfully so, because of the amount of internal equations that are going on in their own head. So sure. I know I need 15 acre feet between now and 2040 to grow X crop of, let's just say, winter wheat and corn. I've got 1,500 cows. I cannot deviate. I have to have this much water. We respect that, and that's why this is a voluntary program. And if you look at it all, it may not work for everyone. It's not designed to work for everyone. It's supposed to work for some. But we understand that there's gray here because not every GSA allocates what we call transition, which is still overdraft, by the way. Then not everyone does that the same way. And so DWR understood that, and they want to make sure that each GSA is taking a look at this on the annual and saying, all right, you're going to be selling DWR 0.83, which is your annual allocation. Or in some basins, they do a block allocation of, I think it's 2 acre feet a year, but they do it in 5-year blocks. And so farmers are really like, well, oh my God, what do I have to sell my 2025 to 2030 allocation up? I mean, those are all things that if I was a GSA and I'm DWR, I hesitate to put that on paper because we don't know what will be available to sell.
Sure.
And so that's why those two statements, the farmer will sell his overdraft allocation and he will farm within sustainable yield, are really important to pair. Because it gives everyone, I think, the flexibility, and it also gives the taxpayer what they're buying here. They are buying sustainability, and they are making sure that we buy security and long-term certainty for both agriculture, but moreover, for those domestic wells that we're trying to protect.
So again, it's a temporary and voluntary program. It's a 1-year contract, and it's a voluntary program. So the state's not buying what you're not selling. And these components are clearly outlined. Again, go to landflex.org. You can see how these pieces all line out. And I think to your point, Anja, it may not work for everybody. It may not work for you this year, but it might work for you next year. And it might work for you in 5 years. And at the end of the day, what the GSAs are really tasked with doing, and if you are successful in managing your basin, your groundwater sustainable yield allocation becomes healthy, right? And becomes it becomes reallocated to you if we do this right. Now, the other component here that you touched on, which I think is critical, is the key here is you are agreeing not to pump. You are not necessarily agreeing not to irrigate.
That's 100% true.
If you have surface water or the ability in a flood, because this snow is all going to melt, I'm just telling you.
Damn it.
It happens. It's amazing what happens when sun hits water, frozen water. It's all going to melt and it's all going to move. If you have the ability to sink groundwater, if you have the ability to use a splash of surface water, do it. You are free to do so under LandFlex. The contract is simply saying you will not pump for this year, and you will retire a portion of that overdraft credit, accelerating your achievement of sustainable yield, okay? With the idea being that you will farm within your sustainable yield. So really important, I think, to remember that in a year like this year, why LandFlex actually makes sense even in a wet year, because of the ability to do that and because of the priority around that. And I really appreciate the flexibility that was worked into the program as a result. It was important to us that the program made sense, not just in a drought, but also in a water year, in a good water year. So
and it started kind of clunky, right? We went through machinations around per acre foot. But the neat thing about what DWR and team developed here in these 3 tiers is that we can dial up or dial down any single tier depending on the hydrology in the future.
Yep.
And so ultimately, it's the objective to be more strategic about recharging. And as opposed to paying farmers to keep fallowing, maybe we then reverse this and start paying them to recharge. So those are all concepts that hopefully LandFlex 2.0 will be able to take up. We encourage people to give us those ideas. This all started because Aubrey and I put our hand up trying to, come up with some new choices for DWR, for Sigma compliance, and for domestic well protection. So, I think we're really excited, but generally speaking, we wanted to make sure we clarified those 2 things as people start to look at this. And I want to be fair to everyone. I've heard a lot of concerns from folks that just can't afford potentially to risk their opportunity cost lost by selling their overdraft now and in the future. I completely respect that. But this is why there's flexibility, because if we're able to bring the whole of the basin into much more effective Sigma compliance faster, hopefully those pressures will balance out on all growers and not just 5 or 6, or even 20 or 30 that might be able to roll in LandFlex. I think it's really going to lift all sinking ships here to have some demand reduction for those who may not be able to do so.
All right, so going forward, GSAs in this first round have been selected. Lots of others have applied. We want to hear from you if you are not in a basin that was selected, because we want to make sure that the state accurately understands, all facets of the state accurately understand the demand for a program like this. Questions, FAQs, your new world and hub for this program is landflex.org. Where you'll find the PowerPoint. You can really good call, revert back to previous podcasts. We've been talking about this program for quite some time. There's a great summary from the presentation at the World Ag Expo on there as well that breaks a lot of this down. Reach out to your technical assistant providers, Western United Dairies, Almond Alliance, Self-Help, CAF as well. We're here to assist. Timeline for everybody, just as a recap, the 3 GSAs that have been selected They are updating their final documentation and data sources sets needed for application, and the farmer portal will open shortly thereafter. You can now be looking, if you want to do the back of the envelope to see if this works for you, you can go to landflex.org. You can select the Sigma Viewer and a number of other resources to see how you would score or qualify. Again, the biggest scoring criteria is going to be your proximity to domestic and rural water systems, at-risk rural water systems, and the potential savings in that space. I think as a final note, all of these definitions, all of these questions, they're out there. The answers are there. They're at landflex.org. If you're still looking for clarity, you can reach out. But it's important to remember, again, temporary and voluntary. It's a tool. It's not necessarily a tool for everyone, but it is a tool, and it's about the water. It doesn't mean you can't farm. It means you just don't pump for a year, and you transition your land into that sustainable yield. And it creates a good accounting mechanism at the local level for that. So, did I miss anything?
I think those are the big ones. I couldn't believe the interest in the program. We knew it was going to be popular. We didn't know it was going to be this popular.
Yeah, I didn't know it was going to be 27 GSAs popular.
And I'm just, you're never really sure that you did something right until you start to see the results. And so we are all going to work together really hard to strive for those results. We want to show that ET was reduced. We want to show that long-term accounting that shows that there's kind of a massive overdraft demand is reduced as a result of LandFlex, so that we can continue this annual funding cycle, hopefully this year, biannual cycle. But I do think that the state is being wise. They're under a tremendous deficit right now, which is a shift in methodology. So they're having to think about things differently, but they want to show proof of concept here. They think we're onto something, and they've been wonderful partners and helping us develop an operational program that really will, I think, strategically target some underserved communities. So Aubrey's email is aubrey@almondalliance.org. And my email is Anja, ANJA, at wudairies.com. You can find all that information on the landflex.org website, along with other technical providers. Let's say you're not into dairy or almonds and you'd rather talk to self-help. They're a great resource for this. Self-help is really going to be helping us, I think, micro-target where we may have missed some wells. We all know the first response we get in the field is dry wells are underreported. I totally respect that. I know that. I know half of them might be ag wells, but the other half are just folks that try to take care of their own business and don't even know that reporting to the state about dry wells is a thing. It is a thing. So our data gaps are pretty significant in some of these regions. So hopefully that's another side aim that the state has here, is to fill in some of those data gaps with respect to wells. So we're excited to get started. The GSAs have been really, really excited. They're all thrilled that they have a new tool in their basket.
Yep.
So a lot of these GSAs, all of these GSAs actually have already received multi-benefit habitat repurposing grants. And so this program plus that, they're really thinking that they're going to be able to reduce demand pretty quickly.
Which is, talk about light at the end of the tunnel. There's just been this sword of Damocles, I think, over everybody's head. And when you consider the hydrology and management over the last, 6 years, it's a freight train, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to that. And so I that's really coming back to it. That's what this is. It's a tool in the toolkit. It's a tool in the toolkit that we didn't have before. And I think one of the things that we hear, or the reaction, especially from those who aren't so intimately involved in resource management, it's very quick and easy to say, well, we should just freaking legislate it and make it happen tomorrow. Let me tell you right now, nature doesn't move that fast. Neither does government. And you're talking about a complete change in the way we even conceptually look at our water supplies. Again, that conjunctive use, that surface and ground together. And so, LandFlex and the state really leaning in here is incredible leadership that should be respected and allowed to maneuver and allow the experts and those actually administering these programs to work. And I think for us as farmers and as farmer representatives, farmer, dairy, rancher representatives, let us be a part of the solution before you ever have a chance to disrespect us and not allow us to move forward here. I think the biggest thing here is the willingness to be a part of a solution that works for everyone, as opposed to just a naysayer and a division, a divisive writer. So I really appreciate the partnership of the state. I appreciate the partnership of almonds and dairy. I don't know why everybody thinks we don't get along.
I don't know why either.
We just don't talk about milk. That's about it.
It doesn't matter. We have to have one without the other.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. And I think, and I appreciate that partnership again, too, self-help, coming on board with us here too, and working with the state and the GSA. So I think this is an amazing moment in time that needs to be respected, and allowed its due diligence to work, and tremendous leadership on behalf of Director Namath and the Department of Water Resources, to move and lean in here, to really come up with tactical, practical solutions that are measurable and accountable in ways that, honestly, we're lacking. And so, we talk a lot about, at least I know on the almond side, that the data that could set us free is also the data that could lop our head off. The important part here is this is data that we're harnessing together, and we're working on it together to actually make good, informed decisions. So, it's a good opportunity for us to be part of the solution in this time. So thanks again.
Oh, you're welcome. Generations of cultural practice changing overnight, both feared and respected. We should all respect the process here. But yeah, this is what Sigma's going to look like, and we're just hitting fast forward on it.
And it's not the end of the world. It doesn't have to be. It depends on how you change your mindset and how we can do that. If there's anybody who can figure that out, it's California agriculture.
That's right.
Done it every time. And I think we need to embrace that and embrace our own sophistication and power here. And this is our chance. So,
yes.
Thanks again, Anja.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.